All right, y'all, we can get started. Grab buckets and spread out.
It's a drizzly night in Northwest Portland, and Philip Fensterer is leading a group of volunteers equipped with headlamps, safety vests, and 5-gallon buckets. They're patrolling a stretch of Highway 30 with their eyes focused on the ground.
I imagine that cars going by wonder what these people are doing out in the rain, in the winter, in the dark.
What they're doing is looking for frogs. Northern red-legged frogs, to be exact.
There's a population of red-legged frogs that mostly lives up in Forest Park, but in the wintertime they come down to the wetlands to breed, to lay egg masses, and then they head back up into Forest Park.
There's just one problem. That busy stretch of highway in between the wetlands and Forest Park.
It's a death trap for the frogs. It's real-life frogger.
From the Gert Boyle studio, I'm Jen Chavez, and this is The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB about the place you call home. About 10 years ago, someone who lives up near this stretch of Highway 30 in Northwest Portland saw the road covered with the bodies of frogs who had tried to cross during the night and gotten squished. They alerted some friends and neighbors, and that's how the Harborton Frog Shuttle, also lovingly known as the Frog Taxi, came to be. OPB Oregon Field Guide producer Jewel Gilfillan tagged along with some of the volunteers. And Jewel, how does this frog taxi work exactly?
Well, one night about 10 years ago, as you said, the residents in this area noticed a lot of frogs, and so they organized themselves into a sort of shuttle service. And since then, a small army of volunteers have kept up this special taxi service whenever the frogs are migrating back and forth between the wetland and Forest Park, which is typically between December and March.
And how many people do this?
On each crew, there are about 15 volunteers, and they get together every night. And on the nights when we were filming, there were about 10 to 15 volunteers distributed between the uphill sides of the highway and the downhill side. The taxi runs 7 days a week, and as long as the conditions are conducive, they will be out there as late as it takes to get these frogs across. Once in a while, they have something called a big night, when conditions are perfect, and there are lots of frogs moving. And they can schedule up to 3 shifts of people. So they have gone till, the middle of the night just to make sure that this population makes it across. The total number of volunteers is almost 100 people. And there are about 80 people on a waiting list to volunteer for this service.
Wow, that is a lot of frog enthusiasts. So who are these folks? What motivates them to do this?
Well, I think of them as just quintessential Portlanders. There's people who live in our metro area and just take advantage of everything we have here. They love being outdoors. They love the environment. They love the creatures that live there. Philip, you've introduced Philip, and he is a resident of St. John's for 20-some years. He's in the Backyard Habitat Certification Program, and he's an avid bike commuter. He just loves living in Portland and being part of his community. And I think he's motivated because he loves the frogs.
When you see a roadkill, it kind of crushes you. And knowing that you had a good chance to do something about that, it's like, that's not going to happen again on my watch.
One of the gals we ran into, called Sierra Lefevre, she really loves frogs. She has a vehicle that has a frog's license plate, has a bumper sticker that says, "I brake for frogs." And, you just talk to her and you can feel the enthusiasm.
I love frogs. I have 9 at home, 9 pet frogs. So, yeah, I just finished the Amphibian Foundation's Master Herpetologist course. And so I was looking for volunteer opportunities. There's not really any in the Pacific Northwest, surprisingly. But I found out about this. I emailed. I was like, I know you guys are full up. Is there any way I can get in on this? And they had an opening. So I've been out here 5 times so far. I love it. I could be out here all night.
So they are just good-hearted people who are into frogs. And the frogs themselves are a local native species. And they're not endangered or even threatened, but they are a species of concern. And a lot of the habitat where these frogs normally thrive has been taken away by human encroachment. And so it's just made things harder for them. And these folks are here to help.
Wow. I love thinking about all these people assembling to help out these little frogs.
And they do. They're all on hold and they're all waiting to get the call. They keep their nights open in case the frogs need them.
How many frogs do they save with these efforts?
They do keep track. They have something called the frog log, and they write down every frog that comes down from Forest Park to the wetland, and then each frog that returns back up to the park. And the numbers vary year to year. When we were there, the frog log recorded about 155 females and almost 1,400 males. And that's sort of toward the end of the migration season. So what does that come to? 1,500-ish frogs that cross the highway every year.
So we saved this little guy's life so he won't get, run over on Highway 30.
A wetland ecologist for PGE conducts a frog survey every year. It's not completely a controlled study or anything super scientific, and the numbers do fluctuate year to year. But they have been increasing steadily for the last 4 years. In 2018, the first year of the survey, they found about 158 egg masses. And the egg masses are where the tiny frogs will come from in the spring. So 158 in 2018. And in 2024, there were 700 egg masses. And then in 2025, there were more than 1,700 egg masses.
I am encouraged by the numbers, so maybe we're making a difference.
And, each egg mass contains 100 to 200 eggs. So that's a lot of baby frogs, and every frog counts.
Yeah, that's great news. I also think if they wanted to, they could start a blog with these updates and call it the Frog Log blog. But that's just for free from me to them. The Harborton wetland is managed by Portland General Electric. The utility company restored the area by excavating it to create a channel to the Willamette River and planting hundreds of trees and other vegetation. It's one of the most significant breeding grounds for the red-legged frog in this region. That's according to Colin McLaren, the wetland ecologist for PGE.
What makes it unique are the sets of conditions that we have out here. We've got a large flooded wetland that stays ponded through May, June or so. It starts filling up with the late fall, winter rains, and that's about the same time that the northern red-legged frogs start their migration to the site. So it's kind of ideal breeding conditions for them, and it's in close proximity to their habitat up in Forest Park.
Colin explained that the male frogs migrate down to the wetland area first.
And on nights that are warmish, 45 degrees or more, and rainy, they will start to move across Highway 30 and down this area. And following the males in January or so, depending on conditions, the females follow. Then they work their way back up through, February, March, maybe into April sometimes if they're late, but usually the migration back to Forest Park is done by March.
Joel, it sounds like weather is a pretty key factor in determining when the frogs actually cross the road over this 3 or 4 month period. How do the volunteers plan around that?
Yeah, that's right. They like very particular conditions.
It's been raining earlier in the day. It's currently about 48 degrees, so that's pretty optimal for the frogs.
So a lot of times the volunteers will be kind of on call, and the frog taxi captain for that night will be monitoring the weather conditions and then calling or connecting with the volunteers and saying, okay, conditions are good or conditions are not. And according to that assessment by the frog captain that night, then they'll come in or not.
Got it. And do the frog taxi volunteers need special frog taxi equipment to do this?
Well, they've kind of come up with their own stuff. They use 5-gallon buckets, but they put these sort of flexible floppy lids on top so that they can access the buckets easily and keep the frogs inside and not let them hop out. They've also got bright kind of fluorescent chartreuse vests that say frogs on them, and they wear those. And they also wear headlamps so that they can spot the frogs in the dark, because all of this takes place after sunset.
You're going to want to get in front of them if they're moving, and sometimes if you shine your light in their eyes, they'll freeze, and it allows you to go ahead and grab them, and you're going to put them in the bucket.
We're talking about the danger to frogs in a real-life frogger situation, but of course these are humans that are also on the highway. You mentioned the safety vests. How do they think about staying safe while they're doing this?
Well, luckily, this particular stretch of Highway 30 has a frontage road on the east side, and on the west side, there's a residential access road, Harborton Road, that goes uphill. So the volunteers are not actually on the side of the highway per se. They are on frontage roads, so it's a little bit safer. There are still cars going up and down those roads, so those bright vests do help.
You might notice how fast some of these cars come down the road, and even though it's infrequent, here on Marina Way and up on Harborton, it's scary.
You were talking earlier about the big nights where they need multiple shifts of volunteers. It is a whole production. But on a regular night, how late are they out there? And how do they know when to stop?
It's a good question. I ask the same thing, and typically the temperature drops as the night progresses. So it's really just condition dependent. So there comes a point of diminishing returns, and they just say, okay, well, I think we've got pretty much everybody who's going to cross tonight, and let's call it a night.
Coming up after a break, we'll hear about some of the challenges of filming the frog taxi in action. Thanks for listening to The Evergreen, our podcast from OPB about the place you call home. If you like what you hear, hop to it and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app, and we will jumpstart your Monday morning with something new and exciting to listen to each week. You can also follow OPB on Instagram at OPB Photo, or follow me directly at Jen Chavez OPB. That's Jen with 2 N's, and I'll keep you posted on everything Team Evergreen is up to. And remember, this episode about the frog taxi and all the great OPB reporting and storytelling you hear on this show is made possible by the support of many thousands of OPB members. Support our journalism by becoming an OPB sustaining member today at opb.org/pod. And now, back to the show. We heard a bit about the challenges the volunteers face as they try to help the frogs cross a busy road. It was also challenging to capture their valiant efforts on video. Oregon Field Guide producer Jewel Gilfillan teamed up with OPB cinematographer and editor Brooke Herbert to get the job done. And Brooke, I understand it was actually one of your first shoots after being hired by OPB, is that right?
Yes, it was. I think I'd only been at OPB for 3 weeks, maybe a month when I got this assignment. And it was also my very first shoot for Oregon Field Guide. So I wasn't too worried about it. I have a decade of experience with cinematography, and so I was expecting anything.
And what were some of the unique challenges of filming the frog taxi in action once you got out on the scene?
Yeah, so just like all of the, volunteers being on call, I was kind of also on call because, as Joel said, the conditions have to be exactly right for the frogs to want to move. So it needed to be after dark. It needed to be rainy. Basically the worst possible conditions for filming anything. So it was very, very dark. It was early March. And because it's dark and everyone's looking across the road for frogs, they're all wearing headlamps. And so it's dark, but you have these bright headlamps shining right into the lens. So we had to kind of maneuver around those to be able to, get good footage. And then too, the frogs were really unpredictable. I kind of had this vision in my head of this parade of frogs just leaping across the road in a really dramatic and cinematic way. But when the couple of nights that I did go out, there'd be 1 or 2 frogs, and then everyone would get really excited. And then, more and more frogs did come out. And so I'd run over and try to catch one on camera. Then the second night when I went out with Jewel, we did see more frogs, and we could also kind of hear like these beautiful sounds, because there's not just the red-legged frogs, there's also these chorus frogs in that same wetland. And so the sound of all of those chorus frogs was just really, really beautiful. And so that was like something unexpected that I tried to capture in audio. We also did have to use some footage provided by the Oregon Zoo. So some of the footage in the episode, like these really nice shots of frogs, are actually provided by the Oregon Zoo. So it was a big, joint effort to pull that episode together.
What about filming in the wetland area in general? What was that like?
Well, that wetland area is actually really beautiful. I never noticed it before. The day we decided to go out with the ecologist, Colin, I went out with Jewel. It was kind of a drizzly day, and we were going to have to wade into the wetlands. So we grabbed a couple of pair of waders from OPB, and I've worn waders before. And so I wasn't too worried about it.
And for anyone who has never seen waders, like, what are they like?
Yeah, so waders are very, very cool. They're these very long and big, kind of almost like overalls that are made of a material called neoprene, and they have booties attached to them. And, fishermen use them, and I love wearing them. You feel kind of invincible because you're walking out into water and you're not getting wet. Or at least that's the way it's supposed to work.
Oh, no.
Because it's my first Oregon Field Guide shoot. I just grab a pair of waders off of, our equipment cart. And I quickly realized, like 30 seconds or a minute after getting into the water with Jewel, that I had picked up a pair of leaky waders. So it's March. I'm in the water. I'm trying to hold this camera, which was just kind of a GoPro on a long pole. And very quickly, like, my socks are feeling wet, and then my pants I'm wearing inside are wet, and then I'm just like pretty much soaked up to my waist. But it wasn't too cold, so I kind of just like decided we just keep going for it.
The sacrifices y'all make for Oregon Field Guide, we at the Evergreen, thank you.
And I did definitely let everyone know when I got back to OPB that those waders needed to be replaced. So it was quickly taken care of. But then they all kind of convinced me that that was like my proper initiation into field guide filming.
Portland General Electric recently proposed what it calls the Harborton Reliability Project. The project would involve cutting down roughly 400 trees on 5 acres of land in Forest Park to make way for new power lines. PGE Senior Project Manager Randy Franks told OPB that the project could actually benefit the frogs.
This project would result in substantial improvements for the northern red-legged frog habitat because one component of our substantial and robust mitigation plan is to fund Portland Park's improving breeding habitats that they've identified inside the park. And these are medium quality wetlands that they can improve well outside the project area and establish a way for frogs to breed inside the park, not need to cross Highway 30 to reach the Willamette River.
The Forest Park Conservancy appealed the initial decision to move forward with the project. Executive Director Scott Fogarty told OPB that his organization is very concerned about potential negative impacts on the areas.
It will remove 5 acres of trees that are 100+ years old. It will fill into streams. It will fill into wetlands that have species that are on the decline. And it will potentially open the door, as the tip of the iceberg, if you will, for future expansion by PG in the park.
The Portland City Council voted unanimously to overturn the initial approval for this project. Jewel, it sounds like it's not going to happen anytime soon, but we heard Randy Franks from PGE say that in the future, the frogs may not need to cross Highway 30 at all. What do you think that would mean to the folks who run the frog taxi?
I think they probably have mixed emotions. I think their priority is to make sure the frogs survive. At the same time, they did acknowledge that it's difficult, just to rely on people to ferry these frogs across the highway. The frog taxi captain, Philip Fensterer, did mention one possible alternative for the frogs.
My understanding is that there are plans to potentially install some sort of a underpass for the frogs. I'm not sure how far along that is or who will fund it, but we put thousands of volunteer hours in every winter, and no, I don't know how sustainable that is.
Okay, a frog underpass. That's an intriguing idea. Did you find out any more details about that possibility, Jewel?
I did. There is an organization called the Oregon Wildlife Foundation that is working on the installation of a specialized box culvert, and it would go underneath the roadway and give the frogs and other small wildlife a safe way to cross. Their design allows the culvert to stay wet during the rainy nights and to be illuminated with just enough ambient light so the migrating frogs will feel comfortable enough to use it. But it still has several steps to clear before the project will be done, and it could take several years. One similar project has been completed, and that is just up the road between Linton and Scappoose. And it is the same sort of thing. It allows the safe passage for small wildlife, including frogs, and it links a wildlife refuge area with the Tualatin Mountains north of Forest Park. The project was led by the Columbia River Estuary Study Task Force, and it took more than a decade to complete. And at the end of the day, it cost $3.4 million. So these projects are not simple endeavors, and because the frogs are not gonna, jump out in front of your car and damage it like a elk or a deer would, it tends to, not get the priority and the funding of a larger scale project. And plus, these frogs are not at a critical point in terms of their species survival. So there are, a few obstacles to surmount yet.
At some point, I think with the way our laws are, when an animal or a species becomes threatened and endangered, then there is much more impetus to fund those sorts of things. But do we want to let it get to that point?
Okay, so it sounds like, at least for now, the frog taxi, this effort led by frog lovers, is the best way to ensure the frogs don't become roadkill. What was it like to see these passionate volunteers in action?
Well, it just really tickled me because as a person who was born and raised in Portland and who loves the outdoors, these were my people, I really could relate to them, and they just had such good intentions and good vibes, It's rainy, it's cold, it's winter, it's dark, and yet they're all out there just having a great time and supporting each other and supporting frogs. And it just was a really nice thing to experience and to be reminded that people can be so good-hearted.
If I can save a frog and the team can save frogs, we're going to do the best we can.
Well, Jewel and Brooke, thank you so much for being with the Evergreen today.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Jen.
Jewel Gilfillan is a producer for OPB's Oregon Field Guide. Brooke Herbert is a cinematographer and editor at OPB. You can see the video they created about the Harborton Frog Taxi at opb.org. Thank you so much for listening to The Evergreen, a podcast from OPB. Julie Sabatier produced this episode, and our technical director is Stephen Cray. Nalene Silva engineered the episode. The OPB podcast team also includes Mia Estrada and Sage Van Wing. Jewel Gilfillan, Brooke Herbert, Ed Yan, and Dave Miller did the interviews you heard. The music in this episode is from Audio Network. And hey, if you have a question for us, do not hesitate to reach out. Email us at theevergreen@opb.org. I'm Jen Chavez. Catch you later.
It's not easy being green, having to spend each day the color of the leaves, when I think it might be nicer being red or yellow or gold or something much more colorful like that.